Okay, chapter 4 of Animal Farm. Okay. By the late summer, the news of what had happened on Animal Farm had spread across half the country. Every day, Snowball and Napoleon sent out flights of pigeons whose instructions were to mingle with the animals on neighboring farms, tell them the story of the rebellion, and teach them the tune of Beasts of England. Most of this time, Mr. Jones had spent sitting in the tap room of the Red Lion at Willingdon, complaining to anyone who would listen of the monstrous injustice he had suffered in being turned out of his property by a pack of good-for-nothing animals. The other farmers sympathized in principle, but they did not at first give him much help. At heart, each of them was secretly wondering whether he could not somehow turn Jones's misfortune to his own advantage. It was lucky that the owners of the two farms which had joined Animal Farm were on permanently bad terms. One of them, which was named Foxwood, was a large, neglected, old-fashioned farm much overgrown by woodland, with all its pastures worn out and its hedges in a disgraceful condition. Its owner, Mr. Pilkington, was an easy-going gentleman farmer who spent most of his time in fishing or hunting according to the season. The other farm, which was called Pinchfield, was smaller and better kept. Its owner was a Mr. Frederick, a tough, shrewd man, perpetually involved in lawsuits, and with a name for driving hard bargains. These two disliked each other so much that it was difficult for them to come to any agreement, even in defense of their own interests. Nevertheless, they were both thoroughly frightened by the rebellion on Animal Farm, and very anxious to prevent their own animals from learning too much about it. At first, they pretended to laugh, to scorn the idea of animals managing a farm for themselves. The whole thing would be over in a fortnight, they said. They put it about that the animals on the Manor Farm, they insisted on calling it the Manor Farm, they would not tolerate the name Animal Farm, were perpetually fighting among themselves, and were also rapidly starving to death. When time passed and the animals had evidently not starved to death, Frederick and Pilkington changed their tune and began to talk of the terrible wickedness that now flourished on Animal Farm. It was given out that the animals there practiced cannibalism, tortured one another with red-hot horseshoes, and had their females in common. This is what came of rebelling against the laws of nature, Frederick and Pilkington said. However, these stories were never fully believed. Rumors of a wonderful farm where the human beings had been turned out and the animals managed their own affairs continued to circulate in vague and distorted forms, and throughout that year a wave of rebelliousness ran through the countryside. Bulls, which had always been tractable, suddenly turned savage. Sheep broke down hedges and devoured the clover. Cows kicked the pail over. Hunters refused their fences and shot their riders onto the other side. By hunters, those are horses, by the way. Above all, the tune and even the words of Beasts of England were known everywhere. It had spread with astonishing speed. The human beings could not contain their rage when they heard the song, though they pretended to think it merely ridiculous. They cannot understand, they said, how even animals could bring themselves to seeing such contemptible rubbish. Any animal caught singing it was given a flogging on the spot, and yet the song was irrepressible. The blackbirds whistled it in the hedges. The pigeons cooed it in the elms. It got into the din of the smithies and the tune of the church bells, and when the human beings listened to it, they secretly trembled, hearing in it a prophecy of their future doom. Early in October, when the corn was cut and stacked, and some of it was already threshed, a flight of pigeons came whirling through the air and alighted in the yard of Animal Farm in the wildest excitement. Jones and all his men, with half a dozen others from Foxwood and Pinchfield, had entered the 5-barred gate and were coming up the cart track that led to the farm. They were all carrying sticks except Jones, who was marching ahead with a gun in his hands. Obviously, they were going to attempt the recapture of the farm. This had long been expected, and all preparations had been made. Snowball, who had studied an old book of Julius Caesar's campaigns, which he had found in the farmhouse, was in charge of the defensive operations. He gave his orders quickly, and in a couple of minutes, every animal was at his post. As the human beings approached the farm buildings, Snowball launched his first attack. All the pigeons, to the number of 35, flew to and fro over the men's heads and muted upon them from the midair. And while the men were dealing with this, the geese who had been hiding behind the hedge rushed out and pecked viciously at the calves of their legs. However, this was only a light skirmishing maneuver, intended to create a little disorder, and the men easily drove the geese off with their sticks. Snowball now launched his second line of attack. Muriel, Benjamin, and all the sheep, with Snowball at the head of them, rushed forward and prodded and butted the men from every side, while Benjamin turned around and lashed at them with his small hooves. But once again, the men with their sticks and their hobnailed boots were too strong for them, and suddenly, at a squeal from Snowball, which was the signal for retreat, all the animals turned and fled through the gateway into the yard. The men gave a shout of triumph. They saw, as they imagined, their enemies in flight, and they rushed after them in disorder. This was just what Snowball had intended. As soon as they were well inside the yard, the 3 horses, the 3 cows, and the rest of the pigs who had been lying in ambush in the cowshed suddenly emerged in their rear, cutting them off. Snowball now gave the signal for the charge. He himself dashed straight for Jones. Jones saw him coming, raised his gun, and fired. The pellets scored bloody streaks across Snowball's back, and a sheep dropped dead. Without halting for an instant, Snowball flung his 15-stone, that's how heavy he is, it's weight in England, against Jones's legs. Jones was hurled into a pile of dung, and his gun flew out of his hands. But the most terrifying spectacle of all was Boxer rearing up on his hind legs and striking out with his great iron-shod hooves like a stallion. His very first blow took a stable lad from Foxwood on the skull and stretched him lifeless in the mud. At the sight, several men dropped their sticks and tried to run. Panic overtook them, and the next moment, all the animals together were chasing them round and round the yard. They were gored, kicked, bitten, trampled on. There was not an animal on the farm that did not take vengeance on them after his own fashion. Even the cat suddenly leapt off a roof onto a cowman's shoulders and sank her claws in his neck, at which he yelled horribly. At a moment when the opening was clear, the men were glad enough to rush out of the yard and make a bolt for the main road. And so within 5 minutes of their invasion, they were in ignominious retreat by the same way as they had come, with a flock of geese hissing after them and pecking at their calves all the way. All the men were gone except one. Back in the yard, Boxer was pawing with his hoof at the stable lad, who lay face down in the mud, trying to turn him over. The boy did not stir. "He is dead," said Boxer sorrowfully. "I had no intention of doing that. I forgot that I was wearing iron shoes. Who will believe that I did not do this on purpose?" "No sentimentality, comrade," cried Snowball, from whose wounds the blood was still dripping. "War is war. The only good human being is a dead one." "I have no wish to take life, not even human life," repeated Boxer, and his eyes were full of tears. "Where is Molly?" exclaimed somebody. Molly, in fact, was missing. For a moment there was great alarm. It was feared that the men might have harmed her in some way or even carried her off with them. In the end, however, she was found hiding in her stall with her head buried among the hay in the manger. She had taken to flight as soon as the gun went off, and when the others came back from looking for her, it was to find that the stable lad, who in fact was only stunned, had already recovered and made off. The animals had now reassembled in the wildest excitement, each recounting his own exploits in the battle at the top of his voice. An impromptu celebration of the victory was held immediately. The flag was run up, and the Beast of England was sung a number of times. Then the sheep who had been killed was given a solemn funeral, a hawthorn bush being planted on her grave. At the graveside, Snowball made a little speech, emphasizing the need for all animals to be ready to die for Animal Farm, if need be. The animals decided unanimously to create a military decoration, Animal Hero First Class, which was conferred there and then on Snowball and Boxer. It consisted of a brass medal, they were really some old horse brasses which had been found in the harness room, to be worn on Sundays and holidays. There was also Animal Hero Second Class, which was conferred posthumously on the dead sheep. There was much discussion as to what the battle should be called. In the end, it was named the Battle of the Cowshed, since that was where the ambush had been sprung. Mr. Jones's gun had been found lying in the mud, and it was known that there was a supply of cartridges in the farmhouse. It was decided to set the gun up at the foot of the flagstaff like a piece of artillery, and to fire it twice a year, once on October the 12th, the anniversary of the Battle of the Cowshed, and once on Midsummer Day, the anniversary of the rebellion. Okay, let's go straight to the questions and see if we can cover some of the things that we need to know. First of all, it asks you, what is the most significant event in chapter 4? And it's going to obviously be the Battle of the Cowshed. And why is it significant? Well, this time the humans were ready for them, had made a plan of attack. But the animals proved to also be prepared. Snowball had a plan. There was an ambush, and the animals came away victorious from basically war with the oppressor, the former oppressor, okay? Which pig proves to be the bravest? Well, they only really talk about one pig in the whole chapter, and it was Snowball. And Snowball not only led the charge near the beginning, he even rushed Mr. Jones when Mr. Jones had his gun and got shot and was bleeding and still continued to lead the fight. He not only came up with a plan, he led, and he was even injured and given a medal. Okay. Why do you think the cat becomes involved in the re-education committee? So this takes you back a little bit. The re-education committee was talking to the wild animals and trying to get them over to their side and everything. And so the scene with the cat is like, hey, sparrows, we can all be friends. Why don't you come and sit on my paw? You may know a cat. If you know a cat who sincerely just wanted to be friends with a sparrow, okay. This is not one of those cats. This is a barn cat. Her whole job was to eat wild animals. You think she's just like re-educating and making friends? Yeah, probably not. She's really not the type. Okay. And why is it fair that the pigs do not do the same share of the work as the other animals? I think we've already kind of covered that a little bit. And they don't. I mean, it says right off when they start doing the farm labor, the pigs don't do the work. They supervise. They make the plans. They form the committees. They're the leaders. Leaders are still working. They're just not doing the manual labor. They're not the laborers. They're the supervisors. They're leadership. Is leadership a job? Yeah. They're the administrators, not the get your hands dirty types. Okay. Why does Molly behave the way she does? What or who might she represent? Okay, Molly had been a cart horse. She wasn't a work horse. She was used by Mr. Jones when he would take his small cart called a trap into town, like more for fun or to go to church or something like that. And she got to be dressed up with ribbons, and they would give her lumps of sugar. So she liked being a servant of the humans. She had a good life. She was pampered. So if we remember that this isn't a story about animals, it's a story about the Russian Revolution, and then beyond that, a story about humans in general. The Tsar would be Jones. What people in what positions would be pampered by him? Still lower classes, but pampered. And there's a lot of things like the servants in the castle probably lived a pretty good life. Pretty good diet, good pay, treated well, maybe. And when the Tsar was killed and chased off, what were they going to do? I mean, their skills aren't needed anymore. They're going to go work in the fields like everybody else. What? Of course they weren't happy about that. There are also people in the bureaucracy, okay? Government has many layers. And if you work for the government and the government gets overturned, again, are you going to go out and work in the fields, in the factories? So there were a lot of people whose whole world was turned upside down by the removal of the leadership. They no longer had their cushy jobs. They were no longer given like the money that they were earning from the aristocracy. Their bosses were gone, in some cases dead. And now they're just supposed to be equal with all the laborers. They want to be equal with the laborers. They thought they were better than that. But in communism, in true communism, everybody is supposed to be equal. Just like the animals' commandments, all are equal. We all work. We all get the same pay. But already, the animals aren't doing that. That's not true already. And that's true of the Russian Revolution too. Almost immediately, instead of everybody being equal, everybody doing the same work, the same pay, the folks who were leading were already getting the better stuff. They didn't have to worry about, food shortages or quality. They got to take what they needed because they were the leadership. And what they say, and what Squealer says to them is that you want us to have the milk and apples because we have to be successful. If we're not successful, Jones gets the farm back. And that is kind of proven by the Battle of the Cowshed, completely orchestrated by the clever Snowball, who teaches everybody to follow his plan, and the plan is successful. It is true. They are leaders and they're learners, and they have got him this far. And if something happened to them, maybe there wouldn't be a rebellion at all. So do they deserve the milk and apples? Maybe. So lots to think about as things get started here. Please read the resources about Trotsky and Stalin. Decide which one is which when it comes to the two main pigs that we still have with us that are the big leaders, okay? Figure out where this is going. Read the Russian Revolution and kind of relate it to what you've read in the story so far. Also, we were introduced to two other characters, Pilkington and Frederick. Those two are very important, and they represent things too. You're gonna have to figure out what they represent, because that's part of it, all right? And that will help you, because at first, they don't like each other, and they don't even really like Jones, but they are really important to the story because they are going to represent entities that were in conflict with the Soviet Union. And by the way, if you don't know what the Soviet Union is, you might want to get that one figured out too, so you can understand this one just a little bit more thoroughly, okay? All right, if you are struggling with these first 4 chapters, make sure that you come to one of the Zoom meetings so we can talk. The next set of chapters will be coming out soon, and so please come back again when we have chapter 5. Check my YouTube channel, it'll be there soon. Bye for now.